Hello, so today we are going to be retrieving individualist. So, has Mr. Birling been presented as changing his individualist ideas? Why is this? So think about this quotation. Look, Inspector, I'd give thousands, yes, thousands. How is that showing a change in his individualist beliefs, but what is his motivation? Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute. Right, repentant. I mentioned this word last lesson. So if you feel repentant, then you are expressing or feeling sincere regret and remorse. So you are feeling guilt. Okay, so guilt for what you have done. So which characters are presented as repentant in the play? So think about which characters are shown to feel guilt for what they've done. You can pause the video and answer those two questions now. So Mr. Birling is showing less of an individualist sort of beliefs when he says, look, I'd give thousands, yes, thousands. He is saying, oh, well, I'd help now. However, he's motivated not because he's changed his views and been converted to socialism, not because he's ready to give up his capitalist ideology and views. It is because he wants to try and buy his way out of a potential public scandal. So we don't feel like Mr. Birling has made any significant or genuine change here. It is still motivated by self-interest and therefore selfish. So Sheila and Eric are both characters who appear repentant. They feel very guilty for what they've done. Mr. and Mrs. Birling so far have not been presented as feeling particularly guilty, and Gerald is a little bit hard to tell. Remember, Gerald left in the middle of Act 2 and is still off stage at this point. So we'll have to wait and see when it comes to him. So today we're going to analyse how Priestley uses language to present the changes in the Birling family. So we're going to see today how they react to the inspector, what the inspector said to them as he leaves. Okay, we've got today's lesson and then one more lesson, and then we'll have the play read. So by the end of the lesson, you'll know how Priestley uses language to show the divide between the younger and the older generation here. So how the divide between Sheila and Eric and Mr. and Mrs. Birling, and how the reaction of the characters to what they did to Eva Smith links to Priestley's intentions in writing the play. Okay? So we are going to read the next little chunk of the play, and then we're going to come back and answer these questions.
You're the one I blame for this, Eric.
I'll bet I am.
You don't realise yet all you've done. There'll be a public scandal.
I don't care now.
You don't seem to care about anything. But I care. I was almost certain for a knighthood in the next honours list.
For God's sake! What does it matter now whether they give you a knighthood or not?
It doesn't matter to you. Apparently nothing matters to you.
So it's interesting that Mr. Birling mentions his knighthood. Remember, we're told right at the start of the play, when he speaks confidentially to Gerald, that he's had a hint or two he might be knighted, which would make him Sir Arthur Birling, which would technically make him a member of the upper class of the aristocracy. He'd never have the same status as someone born into it, like Gerald, but it would still make his family closer to the same status as Gerald's, because remember, he's aware that Sheila's mother Gerald's mother in particular might not approve of Gerald not marrying another aristocrat. And we're told, which is very, very ironic at that stage, that he'll get this knighthood as long as they don't get into trouble or get into the police courts. So we see that the first thing on Mr. Birling's mind here is that he might not get his knighthood. And Eric, of course, thinks that whole concept is totally ridiculous because he realises Mr. Birling is worrying about the wrong things now. He should be worrying about this girl who's dead, not about his knighthood.
But it may interest you to know that until every penny of that money you stole is repaid, you'll work for nothing. And there's going to be no more of this drinking round the town and picking up women in the palace bar.
I should think not. Eric, I'm absolutely ashamed of you. I don't blame you. But don't forget, I'm ashamed of you as well.
No.
Yes, both of you.
Drop that. There's every excuse for what your mother and I did. It turned out unfortunately, that's all.
So again, they are unrepentant. They do not feel guilt. He thinks they were just unlucky that it turned out badly, but there was every excuse for what he and Mrs. Birling did.
That's all.
Oh, well, what have you got to say?
I don't know where to begin.
Then don't.
I know I behaved badly and I'm ashamed of it. But now you're beginning all over again to pretend that nothing much has happened.
Nothing much has happened. Haven't I said there'll be a public scandal, and who will suffer from that more than I will?
That's not what I'm talking about. You don't seem to have learnt anything.
You're wrong there. I've learned plenty tonight. Oh, when I think of what I was feeling when the five of us sat down to dinner tonight.
Yes. And you remember what you said to Gerald and me after dinner, when you were feeling so pleased with yourself? You told us that a man has to make his own way, look after himself and mind his own business, and that we weren't to take any notice of these cranks who tell us that everybody has to look after everybody else. Do you remember? And then one of those cranks walked in, the inspector. I notice you didn't tell him that it's every man for himself.
So Priestley's being very clever here. Structurally, he's reminding us of Mr. Birling's speech just before the inspector arrives, where he was saying a man has to only look after himself. He's expressing individualist ideas and beliefs, and that speech is interrupted by the doorbell, the sharp ring of the doorbell, which is of course the arrival of the inspector. And what we talked there, when we did that bit, we talked about how that symbolically represents the fact that the inspector is going to disrupt and change and challenge this individualist view of Mr. Birling. And remember, Birling referred to socialists as cranks, as idiots. So Priestley's using Eric now to remind us of that.
Is that where the inspector came, just after Father had said that?
What of it?
It's strange. It doesn't much matter now, of course. But was he really a police inspector?
If he wasn't, it matters a devil of a lot. Makes all the difference.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, don't talk rubbish. Of course it does.
Well, it doesn't to me, and it oughtn't to you either. Don't be childish. It's you two who are being childish, trying not to face the facts.
I won't have that sort of talk. Any more of that and you leave this room.
That'll be terrible for her, won't it? Don't you see? If all that's come out tonight is true, then it doesn't much matter who it was who made us confess. And it was true, wasn't it? Father turned the girl out of one job, and I had her turned out of another. Gerald kept her, at a time when he was supposed to be too busy to see me. Eric, well, we know what Eric did. And Mother hardened her heart and gave her the final push that finished her. That's what's important, not whether a man is a police inspector or not.
So notice that now the inspector's gone, J.B. Priestley needs a new mouthpiece to express his thoughts, or the thoughts he wants the audience to have. And he's using Sheila and Eric to express those ideas. So Sheila's just succinctly summed up what they all did, and she's saying it doesn't matter who the inspector was, whether he was a real policeman or not, it doesn't change what they did. And what they did, and learning from what they did, is what is important in this situation.
He was our police inspector, all right. That's what I mean. But I have an idea, and I had it all along vaguely, that there was something curious about him. He never seemed like an ordinary police inspector.
You're right. Yeah, I felt it too.
Well, I must say his manner was extraordinary. So rude and assertive.
Look at the way he talked to me. telling me to shut up. He must have known I was an ex-Lord Mayor and a magistrate and so forth. Besides, the way he talked, I mean, they don't talk like that. I've had dealings with dozens of them.
But it doesn't make any real difference.
Oh, of course it does.
No, Sheila's right. It doesn't.
That's comic coming from you. You're the one it makes most difference to. You've confessed to theft, and now he knows all about it, and he can bring it out at the inquest, and, if necessary, carry it to court. He can't do anything to your mother and Sheila and me, except perhaps make us look a bit ashamed of ourselves in public. But as for you, he can ruin you.
We hardly ever told him anything he didn't know. Did you notice that?
Oh, that's nothing. He had a bit of information left by the girl and made a few smart guesses. But the fact remains that if we hadn't talked so much, he'd have had little to go on. Yeah, and why you all had to go letting everything come out like that beats me.
It's all right talking like that now, but he made us confess.
He certainly didn't make me confess, as you call it. I told him quite plainly that I thought I had done no more than my duty.
Oh, Mother!
The fact is, you allowed yourselves to be bluffed. That fellow was prejudiced from the start, probably some sort of crank, and you let him bluff you into talking about your private affairs. You ought to have stood up to him.
I didn't notice you standing up to him.
No, because by that time, you'd admitted you'd been taking money. What chance had I after that? I was a fool not to have insisted upon seeing him alone.
That wouldn't have worked.
Of course it wouldn't.
Really, from the way you children talk, you might be wanting to help him instead of us. Now, just be quiet, so that your father can decide what we ought to do.
Yeah.
So a couple of important things there. Firstly, we can see again the real divide between Mr. and Mrs. Birling and Sheila and Eric. The fact that Mr. Birling is sort of blaming everyone else, really. Now the inspector's not there to intimidate him anymore. He's saying, you know, it's everyone's fault for admitting what they did. And Sheila and Eric are, of course, thinking he's just being completely ridiculous and he's focusing on the wrong things. And then again, we have the misogyny of Mrs. Birling saying, oh, we have to let your father decide what to do. Because, of course, Mr. Birling is the patriarch of the family. He's the head of the house as the man. It is his job to decide how they should proceed rather than hers, because she's just a woman.
Yes. We'll have to get to work quickly. How's this? Had I better go?
Edna will go. I asked her to wait up to make us some tea.
It might be Gerald coming back.
Oh, Gerald? Of course, yeah, I'd forgotten about him.
Mr. Croft.
I hope you don't mind my coming back.
Of course not, Gerald. All right, Edna. Close the door.
Yes, ma'am.
When did that inspector go?
Only a few minutes ago. He put us all through it.
Now, we needn't bother Gerald with all that stuff.
You might as well know. We're all in it, Gerald, up to the neck. It got worse after you left.
How did he behave?
In a very peculiar and suspicious manner.
He was frightening.
The way he spoke to Mr. Birling and me was quite extraordinary.
If you ask me, he wasn't a police inspector.
You're right.
What?
That man was not a police inspector.
Dun, dun, dun. Right, we're going to stop there for today, and we will listen to the last bit tomorrow. So, just get the PowerPoint back up. So what we can see there is a real divide and a real difference in the way Sheila and Eric are behaving and the way that Mr. and Mrs. Birling are behaving. And we'll see tomorrow where we want to put Gerald. So, what evidence are we given of the divide between Eric and Sheila and Mr. and Mrs. Birling? Why do you think Priestley has shown this divide? Why does this divide exist? Where would you place Gerald so far? We'll confirm that question a little bit more tomorrow. But do you think Gerald is going to be grouped with Sheila and Eric, or do you think we're going to group Gerald with Mr. and Mrs. Birling in whether they feel guilt or not? And do you think Priestley is successful in his intentions in this part of the play. So remember, Priestley's intentions are to show that the hope of change in society is with the younger generation, not the older generation. Do you think he is successful in that by showing the different reactions of Eric and Sheila and Mr. and Mrs. Birling? So you can pause the video and answer those questions. And finally, we have our final feedback. So repentant. Why does Priestley show a divide in the repentance of the younger and older generation? And individualist. Why was Priestley against individualist attitudes? Okay, so answer those two questions and then you are done for the day, and I will see you tomorrow.